In this episode, we're going to talk about the basics of creating simple three-note chords. We'll introduce you to the very fundamental major and minor chords. And we'll also show you how to play the weirder augmented, diminished, and suspended chords. So let's get to it. Alright, so we're going to build chords where the root note is C. First, let's number the notes on the C scale from 1 to 7. These are called the degrees of the scale. Number 1 is called the tonic, and it defines the name of the chord. In this case then, we'll be building C chords. The most basic chord we can build is the C major chord. To build it, we need the first degree, the tonic, the third degree, and the fifth degree. So in this case, a C, an E, and a G. Notice that the distance between the root and the third degree is a major third. And between the root and the fifth, it's a perfect fifth. So if you're familiar with intervals, that's the recipe for making a major chord. If you're not, don't worry, because we've already made a video on them and there's a link in the description. If that still feels too complicated for you, you can also think of the distances in semitones. So from the root C, we go up 4 semitones to the third, and 7 semitones from the root to the fifth. That's it for the major chord. Super simple and resolved. But now let's take a look at its counterpart, the minor chord. For a minor chord, we use the same 3 degrees, the tonic, the third, and the fifth. But this time, we lower the third degree by 1 semitone. So in this case, we get a C, an E flat, and a G. The distance between the root and the third becomes a minor third, hence the name minor chord. And between the root and the fifth, it remains a perfect fifth. If you want to think in semitones, this is 3 semitones from the root to the third, and 7 semitones from the root to the fifth. So that's the minor chord. Still simple and resolved like a major chord. Now, you will notice that major chords can be perceived as grander and more optimistic, and minor chords tend to feel darker and more mysterious. And that difference in sound comes from the third degree being a major or a minor third. But now let's move on to some 3-note chords that require resolution. This basically means that when played by themselves, they can feel dissonant and unstable, and they make us want to move on to a more resolved or final sounding chord, like the major and minor chords we just talked about. So the first of these chords is the augmented chord. For the augmented chord, we still use the tonic, the third, and the fifth degrees. But this time, we raise the fifth degree. So in this case, we get a C, an E, and a G sharp. The intervals here are a major third, like in a major chord, and an augmented fifth. That's where the name comes from. In semitones, that's 4 from the root to the third, and 8 from the root to the fifth. There you go, an augmented chord. There's a slight sense of wonder there, and it feels like it wants to resolve to a major. Very interstellar. Now, the counterpart to the augmented chord is the diminished chord. Again, we use the tonic, the third, and the fifth degrees. But this time, we lower both the third and fifth degrees by 1 semitone. So in this case, we get a C, an E flat, and a G flat. The intervals here are a minor third, like in a minor chord, and a diminished fifth, hence the name again. In semitones, that's 3 from the root to the third, and 6 from the root to the fifth. A diminished chord. Very mysterious, maybe slightly evil, and it feels like it wants to resolve to a minor. Now, let's move on to some chords that lack the third degree that gives us that major or minor feeling. Suspended chords. First up is Sus4. To build it, we use the tonic, the fourth degree, and the fifth degree. So in this case, we get a C, an F, and a G. The intervals here are a perfect fourth and a perfect fifth. In semitones, that's 5 from the root to the fourth, and 7 from the root to the fifth. So, a Sus4 chord. Because of that third having been replaced with the fourth, the general vibe of this chord is slightly vague and open to interpretation. It certainly feels like it wants to resolve somewhere, but is that a major? Or is it a minor? Similarly, we have the Sus2. To build this, we use the tonic, the second degree, and the fifth degree. So in this case, we get a C, a D, and a G. The intervals here are a major second and a perfect fifth. In semitones, that's 2 from the root to the second and 7 from the root to the fifth. A Sus2 chord. Once again, since that third is missing, it's not particularly clear if the Sus2 wants to resolve to a major or a minor. So before we dig a little deeper into the different ways that we can play these chords, let's have a little recap. Here are the 6 different chords that we saw today and how they're built. Major chords, minor chords, augmented chords, diminished chords, suspended 4 chords, and suspended 2 chords. So to get some practice, try identifying these chords that are not in C and leave a comment with your answers. And if you can't be bothered but you've made it this far, leave us a like to tell our algorithmic overlords that this video is worth watching. Thank you so much, we really appreciate it. Now, this is not the only way to play these chords. By rearranging the order of the notes within a chord, we can create inversions of that chord. So far, we've used the root note of the chord as the lowest note, followed by the third, and then the fifth. This is called the root position of the chord, in this case a major chord. But we can change the lowest note to be the third of the chord, with the fifth above it, and the root above that. That's called the first inversion of the chord. Also, we can change the lowest note to be the fifth, with the root above it, and the third above that. This is called the second inversion of the chord. As you can hear, the general feeling of the chord doesn't change. But each inversion highlights a different note in the chord, so you can use different inversions to better frame a specific melody or to transition to another chord whose notes fall in a similar space. Compare this to just playing all the chords in root position. Obviously, all of the chord types have inversions, not just majors. So here are the inversions for all the other chords that we saw today. So that's it for the basic 3-note chords. Now you're ready to move on to spicier, more interesting chords like the 7 chords, the 9 chords, and added tone chords, as well as learn how to join chords together into interesting chord progressions. So whenever you're ready, check out our other music theory videos, and we'll see you next time on Mixed Signals. Bye bye.